Hi, Professor. This is Nagarjyoti. My teammates are Manasa and Shrikant. Today, I am explaining about the risk assessment of additional works in railways and railways construction investments is used the bias network. And first, coming to the abstract, the execution of railway infrastructure building projects that includes the sustainable development goals is the difficult process that involves a considerable expenses of individual investment phases. Using the network is possible to evaluate various risk reducing methods. Assume that the effect of the risk reduced methods measures and decides a describable level of effects such as a great financial resources as a consequence of extra labor. Both the design assumptions and the conditions of the project's implementation might be modified throughout the execution of task. An important component of building projects is the endeavor to avoid possible hazards. And next one is introduction. Risk management is construction is a topic that has received a lot of attention in the industry literature. The application of large infrastructure construction projects in accordance with the sustainable development goals in the multi-stage process. To determine the likelihood of the certain event, qualitative and qualitative research is undertaken. The influence of elements starting the certain of risk on various variables, including the nature and size of the project, and various risk qualification methodologies are researched in the literature in additional to the approach sacrifice in the standard. The danger described as a function described in the formula R equal to F of C, P of P comma C. P is the risk and R is the risk and P is the possibility of event occurrence and C is consequence of event. The application of the large infrastructure construction projects in accordance with the sustainable development goals is a multi-stage process. Next one is a framework module of for the risk assessment methods. The risk assumption items according to the standard requirements consists of three sequences steps. First one is a risk identification. Second one is risk analysis, and last one is risk evaluation. Offering multiple of all factors can be developed difficult, but the identification process should be carried out throughoutly as possible. Consider all contexts and factors and conditions specific to discuss issue according to the adopted methodology. Each step related to a distant technique in the risk as assumption. The sections of the standard outline the essential assumptions and activities that decision makers managing risk in the company should take for each of them. In this topic, the author used structures or semi-structured interviews at the risk identification stage. Um, Bayesian statistics and bias networks for risk analysis and the consequences or the probability matrix method for the selected sanitary for risk assumption to assess the risk of additional work in the railway construction projects. Next topic is identification of the risk of additional work in railway projects. The specialty were careful chosen and the study were performed through the interviews. The writers proposally picked each relay to represent two different forms. According to the assumption, choice of structure or semi-structure interview method, the other prefer the questionable with questions that allow for identification of the most important parametric describing additional works in the rail infrastructure construction in investment in Poland. And these questions are: please specify the factors that intimate the creation of additional works in railway infrastructure construction interviews and indicated the livelihood of this occurrence. please specify the topics of construction works that occur with the occurrence of the additional works in railway infrastructure construction investment and indicate the likelihood of their occurrence, and please specify the 3 time period. It's like the months which are the most likely date for the extending the duration of the railways. The specific following the development of questionnaire and the individual direct interviews were performed with 5 construction process participants involved in the building of the railway infrastructure in Poland. And in accordance with the standard recommendation, risk identification should compare the following elements: risk identification, risk assumption for consequences, risk assessment of a possible sanitizers. The respondents respond were criticizer based on this suggested system. Next topic, my teammate Shrikant will continue.
Thank you, Jyoti. Thank you for giving the opportunity. Risk analysis, Bayes statistics, and the Bayes network method. The Netica software was used to build the model in the form of a Bayes network. Risk analysis was carried out in 4 stages that we are related to this Bayes network design. The individual steps is include creating the nodes of the Bayes network, first one, and second one is giving a relationship to particular nodes. And third one is assigning event probabilities. And fourth one is performing calculations. For risk modeling, the Bayes networks method was chosen, which seems to be most appropriate for the problem in question because it's based on the probability of events and allows the introduction of new information to the model using expert knowledge of historical data. Creation of the nodes of the Bayes network. The nodes of the Bayes networks were created using selected risk variable, the possibility of extra works, type of additional works, and the recursion of the phenomena. There are 9 nodes in the risk assessment model. They were each allocated distinct occurrence that corresponded to the features of specific node. The implications of events that occur later in the models of functioning, the circumstance surrounding their occurrence are described. For example, an example of node that describes the occurrence of workplace inefficiency, bad workplace inefficiency, as well potential risk scenarios. Note bad organization of work and possibility scenario consequences. Here is the occurrence and does not occur. For each of the 9 selected risk assessment factor, an analogous process of attribution possible events was created out. The determination of relationship between individual nodes in the network is related to the right construction of Bayes network. Various ways being used for many factors influence that outcome include but not limited the characteristics of the event being studied, investigated data availability and problem complexity. Many scholars also emphasize the importance of the process building relationships on the internet is iterative used to be changed expert knowledge was used to create a relationship between individual nodes. Interviews, research, and writers' personal experience were used to compile this report. Relationships will be formed. This diagram, Bayes network model to assess the risk of additional works. The study of singularity necessity is established of an indirect event of the form of a Bayes network node called additional works. This because determining the context of the works, important context of the work, node was presented as a separate entity. If there are any additional works, if there are none, by linking the nodes, the events of model forming. The risk element, bad work organization, investors, Investors changes investors. The impact of the appearance of work in the form of kind of works, project documentation, and the effects of the appearance of work, form types of works, industrial projects, track projects, and network projects. The proposed network is was employed. Yeah, assigning event probabilities. The model's proper operations necessity assigning a probability of occurrence to each for more than the bias network is a distinction by the fact of the events of the being nodes and project documents errors. Investors changes and project document errors are introduced directly by defining the probability level. The so-called condition probabilities, which are based on the technique, must be used to represent other nodes connected by reciprocal interactions. This necessity the writers analyzing all potential sequences of events and calculated their probabilities and potential sequence of conditional probabilities tables are used for purpose. A table of conditions probabilities is provided as an example. The so-called conditions probability tables are used for this purpose. Table of condition probabilities for the additional works node. A table of conditions. Yeah, next slide. Performing calculations. The Thomas Bayes theorem, which binds the conditional probability of two occurrences conditioning each other, is the essential relationship employed in the development of the Bayes network. We can determine the probability of all occurrence in a network by applying these theorem to a series of events. Creating a large network necessity proper programming, assigning, giving a probabilities of the nodes, which can be associated with great difficulties. Bayes theorem is presented in formula, while the condition probability theorem is presented in formula. P of A union equal to P of BA into P of A, P of B. This where A and B events are, and P of B is the probability of event occurring if event, and P of BA is the probability of event B. Occurring of event A occurs, P of A intersection B and P of B, where A and B events is the probability of event occurring a B occurs. P of A intersection in the probability of the common part of events, and A and B is the preparing the model. A calculation is we were carried out. Yeah, Bayes network conditions probability calculations. Calculation of conditional probabilities was performed using a Netica software. The result of calculations is a functioning network that can be used for the next stage of the risk assessment evaluation. The network after calculation together the determinant of condition probabilities of events presented in this diagram. Yeah, risk evaluation building risk assessment matrix. Prior to beginning the risk assessment, the subject risk criteria must be established. The authors, we are unable to discover a method, dedication, and additional works in the available literature on the subject. So the matrix methods was developed to determine the risk methods. This strategy is consists with the assumptions formula is work in which the risk is expressed as the product of probability and its using a matrix evaluation risk, defining a range of probability values, events, consequences, as well as assigning a point values to certain ranges. Risk assessment requires introduction of the assumed risk criteria and the effects of the risk in the matrix individual matrix cells. We are additionally described a point value of color. The color was selected according to the risk level as follows. Low risk is the blue, medium risk is green, high risk is yellow, very high level risk is red. Comparison of risk criteria is reference to assumed risk. Yeah. Yeah. Risk assessment matrix like point values. The application of Bayes network to the discussed problems allows the use of unique possibilities of this mathematical method in the form of selected event scenarios. In addition to the base of events probabilities model on the basis of research, one can develop further modification on different level of event details. But situation best reflects the scenarios that are possible to reality according to the authors is to be declared 0 to 100%. The assignment of the values can be read as the occurrence of events 100% probability level, as an the greatest impact of the appearance of negative and positive effects can be focused on this work. One selected scenario of events will be analyzed. Risk will be evaluated in accordance with previously established procedure. Yeah. Next, my teammate Manasa will explain remaining topic. Thank you.
Good morning, Professor. This is Mansa. So I'm going to start with the topic that is event scenario analysis. So this event is put at the top of the project documentation errors list. To explore the possibilities in the faulty event, 100% probability was anticipated. The consequence of this event included the introduction of inadequate design documentation, resulting the probability was retrieved from the extension of the implementation node, such as like raising the period of implementation to the 3 months level with 36%, enhancing the duration of deployment from 3 to 6 months with 40.7%, and enhancing the duration of deployment from 3 to 6 months. The low amount of risk can be acknowledged by investors based upon the hypothesis of the produced risk assessment method, and a while high level of risk should be therefore be analyzed, which may result in removal of further steps of the investment's duration. The instance to be examined will be the existence of a risk factor, which may include the development of a project documentation problems. The achieved results provides for the categorization of the prospective events into two levels, that is low risk and a high risk. Next is a risk mitigation proposal. So the author decided one strategy of risk mitigation that appears to be implementable in the process of railway investment implementation among the viable choices to pick from, like the risk transfer mitigation contingency plan. The risk mitigation is a method for lowering the likelihood or the severity of the unfavorable risk even to an unacceptable level. Regardless of the methodology used, was assumed that the investor received a 50% reduction in the possibility of the appearance of defective design documents. The network model is provided along with the lower risk factor for defection design documentation, and the results collected for the choices for extending the investment's deployment was recalculated, and the outcomes of these calculations, including the risk level certifications, are given. So some of the most prominent strategies are the risk avoidance, transfer, mitigation, acceptance, and the emergency plan. So I would like to summarize this paper by saying that the authors have offered one of the alternative ideas for developing the risk management plan, which incorporate the risk identification, analysis, and the assessment. Mitigants can be categorized as behaviors that substantially decrease the likelihood of manifestation of the risk factors. The chosen situation includes an original method that is typically focused on the Bayes network. This method permits the development of complicated effect networks, which can still be modeled utilizing the surveys, historical data, and the expert opinions. So as it is shown in the event scenario, a well-programmed network can be employed to adopt risk mitigation measures and investigate their consequence on the other network nodes. These networks can be used to explore the impact of individual event scenarios. Using the network, the user can consider alternate measures to minimize risk, analyze the influence of lowering risk of variables, generating additional work on the network others components, and determine a reasonable level of benefits. The mitigants can be categorized as behaviors that substantially decrease the livelihood of the manifestation of the risk factors. Then the proposed diagram is a simple variation of the author's Bayes network, which is then used to analyze the additional components and the impact of the risk of future networks. The authors also seek use to new information gained from the assessment or analysis of the historical accomplished network learning. The assessment of extended structures in conjunction with the proposed prevention measure may develop in the comprehension process of managing the risk of additional works happening during the deployment of the railway networks, investments which would be incorporated and used in practice by the investors on railway line managers. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.